Today we come to the second in a series on homelessness. In this last one, we're going to be going beyond homelessness with a guest that we had last week, Gerald L. Campbell, who is the senior advisor to the Commissioner of Health in the state of Texas, but who, before coming here, spent time on the streets in Washington, D.C., growing close to persons who were homeless, taking their pictures, and both in images that we will be seeing and that we'll be hearing. Stay with us on Austin Faith Dialogue.
Austin Faith Dialogue, at the crossroads of religion and life, a series highlighting the cultural and social interactions between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KXAN. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, in behalf of Austin Metropolitan Ministries, bidding you welcome to this edition of the show. We have today, again with us, someone who has brought a unique perspective to the issue of homelessness in America. Gerald L. Campbell was in government in D.C. up until 1990 in various positions, and then for 8 years he spent time on the street with homeless people, growing close to them, coming to understand something of what made their condition what it is. And then coming to the state of Texas in 1998, bringing with him that insight that he's sharing with us on the show today. Jerry, again, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Rich.
And last week we were looking at what you perceive to be the causes and effects of homelessness in the country. And today we'd like to give special emphasis to the ways and means of dealing with that and helping people move beyond homelessness. I think it might be helpful for folks who weren't with us last week to just give a little bit of a sense of, you were in government before you made this 8-year excursion onto the streets of D.C. What had you done before you did that?
I was senior advisor to the United States Information Agency, to the director of the United States Information Agency. And as I said last week, the thing that got me interested in homelessness was the perception that people overseas had about America and the role that homelessness played in it.
And
as they came to visit the United States.
Now, before that, your work with the Information Agency, hadn't you also been involved in other aspects of government?
Yes, I was. I worked in the U.S. House of Representatives as a senior staff member for about 14 years, and before that, I taught at university level.
All right. So, the reason I was thinking it would be good to put that in perspective about your work before you opted out of that for a while, and then before you came back here and again became the senior advisor to the Commissioner of Health.
Right.
This is bookend by government service. And yet what you were saying last week was you perceive the issue of homelessness as being, after decades of government programs, needing more than public policy can provide.
I think that the problem is really deeper than we think. Certainly we're addressing the issue across the country. We have programs in the government and private sector in every state in the union, and not just with homelessness, but with a lot of issues that deal with people's lives. And we have these programs set up, and yet at the same time, we somehow are missing, from what I see, a very important aspect of this problem, and that is, why does it arise in the first place? Is it something about the fact that people fell through the cracks? Is it that we don't have affordable housing? Is it that people don't have jobs? That may be part of it, but what I discovered in my talking with these people was that there's something much deeper, and it challenges all of us as a nation and individuals within this country.
Well, I have to say that in hearing you speak about this before and in reading something of what you said, I'd like to just share with our viewers what you put in the St. David's Episcopal Church Messenger. The homeless are judged to be individuals who give up on life, roam the streets as drunks, addicts, beggars, threats to person and property. I would like to carry your imaginations and your heart beyond these epithets and explore the spiritual dimensions of homelessness through stories they've related to me. Now, last week we looked at some of the pictures that you took.
Right.
And today we'd like to look at these again and let those be the means by which you can give us that sense of the spiritual dimension. Here's one.
This is a gentleman who's a Muslim, and he's from California, and he comes from a fairly well-to-do family, and he's out on the street. And what I think the image is trying to convey is not so much the poverty and the material conditions, but if you look at the face, and if you look close in the face, you'll see tears coming down his face. There is that sense of not being connected with others, of somehow the conditions in which he was raised, that he didn't have the love in his life that would give him that sense of authenticity within, that sense of well-being, that sense of self-esteem.
Okay.
We often talk about self-esteem as though we can just reach down and assert it for ourselves. But if we look into our own life and look deep enough into our own life, part of what self-esteem is about is the fact that others accept you for who you are.
Now this is a man who didn't come out of a poverty-stricken background.
Right.
So it illustrates what you're saying from the standpoint that there's this alienation
Right.
that led him to be in this condition.
Right.
Let's see another one. Another one of your images.
This is a person. You see just a little part of him there, his face and his hands, but he's looking into a dumpster, and what he does on a regular basis is to collect trash like this, and then he burns it, and he cooks on it, on the fire that he creates. But if you look at his face, you see once again the same thing. There's a sense of alienation. If you look at his hands, there's a gentleness there. And he transcends this trash. What I'm trying to do is to bring dignity to these people, a sense of really the humanity. And I'm trying to put a human face on the whole question of homelessness, that it's not a matter simply of them falling through the cracks, but it's a matter of their relationships with others.
Okay. And you talked to this individual who's portrayed here.
Yes, yeah.
And did he give you some sense of what alienation meant in his life?
He was a person who was very successful. In fact, he was an attorney. And for 29 years, he gets a pension from the federal government. He gets Social Security. He has a wife and family. He has a house. But he chooses to live on the street.
Oh, well, that's unusual.
And the reason why he lives out there was because he didn't feel like he was respected. Members of his own family.
I see. Okay. Well, that's a rather graphic example of how it's more than economic factors. Okay. Let's see still another one.
This is this picture was taken about 2 in the morning, and the person on the left, you see him scratching himself. In a way, he looks. If you look at the image close up, he looks crazed, but he has fleas, and he's scratching. The person that he stays with there, and this is right in the middle of town, and for those who have been to Washington, D.C., this is in the middle of Chinatown in Washington, D.C. There's an empty parking lot there, and that's where they are. And you see certain icons of our society, once again, like I said last week, and yet all of this is trash. And the one on the image on the right, he's wrapped in trash. And yet, once again, there's this transcendence. And of course, you see the conditions. You see the rats that are hovering around and eating the scraps of food that are left over. But this is where they sleep. This is what their condition were at night.
Okay. Now, this is, again, people that you got to know.
Yes, yes.
And were they people that fell between the cracks?
They fell through the cracks in a different way. Junior, which was the one on the right, did not find a way. He felt like he felt uncomfortable in his own family. And he left his family and very young went to the street. And he had been to the street for a long time.
I see.
And probably I would say, since he was about 12 or 13 years old.
Now, let's turn to the ways and means just for a moment. What will it take for Junior?
It's hard. It's really hard.
I mean, if he's been on the street that long, there's that habituated to his life.
It's very difficult. Anybody who has worked with homeless people realize how difficult it is. Some are easier to deal with than others. But, you know, we have all kinds of services. We have, you know, in drug treatment programs, we have food, shelter, clothing, housing, job assistance, educational programs, and so on and so forth. But they have developed something internally that makes it very difficult. There's really a fear of others that they develop, and they feel comfortable amongst themselves, but they don't feel comfortable because they know they're not going to be accepted. And put yourself in their shoes. I mean, if you were like that, if you had developed out there in the street and you don't have good verbal skills, and you don't have a lot of other things, what does that do when you try to go out and become part of society? And yet at the same time, we don't accept them.
Well, you've only got a minute left before the break, but I do, when we come back, I'd like to see what you see as the way to come at this publicly. I mean, you go to them as an individual, and you can establish rapport and learn who they are and give them whatever encouragement you can. But both the public sector, you work for government. What is the role of government in this, and what is the role of the private sector, the churches? And if you have instances of congregations or religious groups that have made a difference, I think that'd be helpful to folks who are looking in, because so often the one thing that matches the helpless feeling of the homeless are those of us who aren't homeless, and we think, well, you know, we feel pretty impotent in the face of the extent of this problem. Right. But fortunately, we have a chance to take a break and catch our breath and collect our thoughts. And folks, just stay with us and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Austin Faith Dialogue, where today we're in the second and the last of a series on Beyond Homelessness. And Gerald L. Campbell, Senior Advisor to the Commissioner of Health of the state of Texas, is our guest. And we continue, Jerry, on the emphasis today on ways and means of dealing with the issue and the problem of homelessness. Have you found any congregations or churches in, like when you were in D.C., 8 years there on the streets with folks, that were helping in an effective way?
There are many, really, many churches, many organizations. One that I dealt with or went around a lot was the Gospel Mission in Washington.
Okay.
Excuse me. And they had a full range of programs, and it was, since this is a religious affiliated program here, I think it was a faith-based organization, and they brought a sense of values, and they created a sense of community where people could come there and feel safe and feel like they were part of something. They had all the different programs. They had computer training. They had job assistance and so on and so forth. They had places where people could stay. They had room for about 160 people, and it was filled up every night. And but the problem is not so much what they do or what they don't do in treating people that come from the street. The problem is that when they go and they leave and they go back out into the community, they find it very difficult because people tend to look down upon them. And, there's a certain brutalization that takes place in a person's life when they are homeless, when they go through, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering internally. And it begins to show up in how they manifest themselves to the world.
I see.
And so they go out, and the truth of the matter is so many of them are not wanted. And so they tend to gravitate back to the same group of people that got them in trouble in the first place. And so it becomes a revolving thing. And I think that gives us a different kind of focus, really, on what we have to do.
There's, in Austin, I know the Interfaith Hospitality Network, where a group of 13 churches will rotate having 14 homeless individuals in their facilities for a week at a time. It's been going on for about 5 or 6 years now. And I had some experience with that when I was serving a downtown church here. And I observed that people could break out of the cycle with that kind of support.
Right.
That was beyond a bureaucratic one.
But there's another aspect to this, and it has less to do with the cycle. Once a person becomes homeless, then they get treatment, and then they might come back. But there's a whole aspect of prevention. Why is it that people end up on the street? Why is it that so many young people engage in violence? When you talk about homeless, you're not just talking about people that don't have a home. You're talking about runaways. You're talking about substance abuse. You're talking about, in many respects, violence. You're talking about a whole range of issues, and they're all in the life of one person. Now, why is it that they do that? And that's what I tried to explore more than anything else, is the why. And I came to realize that there's a price we pay when we have a kind of individualism where the world revolves around me. If I can't reach out and show love, compassion, understanding, and most of all mercy to others, then what I do is I in effect sort of taint and color and undermine my own life by being that way. But I can have irreparable damage on somebody else's life.
Okay, let's take a look at, we have, I think, 2 or 3 pictures left that you could illustrate that. Here's someone that, would that illustrate what you just said?
Yes, I mean, if you got to know that person, and the poignancy of this particular image is not just simply the people walking by, but the baby blanket and the teddy bears in the blanket. But if you got to know that person, and you got to know them as a person, it would be an entirely different situation.
You did get to know that person?
Oh, yes.
Okay, tell us who this person is.
Well, this person his name is Rick, and this is where he sleeps because it's cold, and that's a heat thing there. It gets a lot colder in Washington than it does in Austin.
Right.
But see, the point is that once you get to know them as a person, then you're not stereotyping. You're not saying, well, you're lazy, or you're crazy, or you're just, And
okay, now Rick had been in this life situation for a long time?
It started back when he was young. Back when he was young. I mean, he could not feel comfortable in the situation that he was, whether with his family.
So he voluntarily left?
Most people do.
Uh-huh.
Most people do. In fact, I've run across a lot of people on the street who you will see and then you won't see. And I say, well, where did you go? And they say, well, I went home. And I say, you went home? Yeah. Well, how come you're not staying there? Well, I didn't feel comfortable there. My mother, she pushed me, or she did this, or she did that.
Yeah.
And so they come back to the street.
But there are a high percentage of folks on the street that have had mental problems. I mean, were formerly in mental hospitals and this sort of thing, right?
Right. But they were released some 20 years ago.
Ah.
And while that's still the case, oftentimes we tend to use mental illness as an excuse. I remember one time, even before I started this project, I walked over to the bank across the street from where I was working. And this guy was standing there, and he was panhandling, and he wanted some money. And I went on into the bank, came back out, and I started talking to him. And he just started babbling, and I couldn't understand what he was saying. But I stood there and I listened. I finally, after about a half hour, I finally said, well, I've got to go. And he says, I know you didn't understand what I said, but he says, I want to thank you for listening to me. He says, my life has been so lonely. You see, so this sense of spiritual alienation even impacts those who are mentally ill.
I see. Let's take a look at another image.
This is JoJo. This picture was taken on his birthday, and he walked me across town. And we went into this alley, and this graffiti was there, and he stood in front of it, and he said, I want you to take this picture. I want to send it to my parents. And if you look at it, I mean, it's really a statement about himself. No anger, no regrets, no excuses, no apologies, no guilt, no pride, no pain. The door is shut, and that's how he feels. But he wanted to make a statement. This is his way of explaining himself to his parents, and it's about that alienation. And,
okay, you keep coming back to that.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Do we have another one? I think maybe we have time for still another.
This is very similar to the one of the person living on the street. The details of this image go beyond, are not quite what the image is about, but she was walking down the street and she was wobbling, and the police arrested her because they thought she was drinking. Well, the truth of the matter is she was on Dilanka for seizures, and she was having trouble. And so they arrested her. She died about 3 weeks later of a seizure.
But she was a homeless person.
Homeless person, but once again, we don't know them as persons.
I see.
We don't, and do we really know, how many people do we know as persons in our lives? That's the real question.
Yeah.
Do we take time out for each other?
Yeah, well, that's the thing that impresses me is the fact that you do take the time, you did, to talk to folks, even if they were out of their heads, it seems like, and they appreciate the fact that you paid attention. And I have to say that I want to come back to what we said at the beginning, that your career, except for this 8 years for paying attention to homeless persons individually, was it in the government service?
Primarily, except for teaching.
And so even what you're saying, and I understand, is that you can't cure this condition just with public policies and programs. But can you deal with it effectively without those public policies and programs?
Oh, absolutely not. You have to provide services. These people are hurting. They're hurting across the broad breadth of this country. But it's not enough, because we have to begin to think in terms of prevention. If we can understand why and get into the deeper dynamics of this, then we might discover that somehow within our own resources as individuals and the way we treat and relate to each other and the language we use, and that if we can begin to address that and become a little bit mellow in how we relate, it might make a difference. It might not force a young boy to go out and to try to find a way to belong. which is what this is about.
So what the we you're talking about, you and me and the people who are looking at this program.
All of us.
Okay.
All of us.
So that insofar as anyone who's looking in can identify with the conditions that make for either homelessness or gang violence or drugs or whatever, that there is a choice that each of us have in terms of being aware of how much difference we can make in these individual relationships.
One person somewhere in someone's life can make all the difference in that person's life. That's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you. I think it's happened to everybody. One person makes a lot of difference.
All right. But the problem is so vast, Jerry. I mean, this number of homeless I judge has not decreased, despite these government programs you're talking about.
Right.
And yet, would you change the government programs? Would you do something different about public policy to inject somehow this emphasis that you've got?
Well, you know, we have to realize that programs are programs, but the thing that's really effective about a program is the people. The people make the difference within the program for the people that are in, there to benefit from the program. Particularly, you can see that easily with young people. It's the people that's the success, not the program itself. The program provides the occasion.
Now, is this the connection that you're making then with your spiritual dimension emphasis, now working with the Texas Health Commissioner as to how these programs are administered, how they're developed in order to not just be impersonal?
That's part of it. I mean, if we can understand that when a person comes to get services, that if they're not treated with respect, they may not come again.
Okay.
Then that's an important insight. But at the same time, if we can probe deeper and understand at a deeper level what this problem is by collecting stories like I have and interacting with people, then we can create a new language and perhaps inspire people to change the way they relate.
These stories that you've shared with us then, through photographs and as you interpret them, is this working its way into the work that you're doing day by day?
We're trying to understand at a deeper level. We have a resolution from the state Texas legislature, Senate Concurrent Resolution 79, and we're trying to explore not so much homelessness, but we're using the same approach to understand youth violence.
Okay, all right. Well, unfortunately, we don't have 79 minutes to explore Resolution 79. We're just about out of time.
Great.
But for the 2 weeks that you've been here, it's just been great. And
Thank you.
we look forward to seeing more of the effects and results of your work, and we will hold you in our thoughts and wish you well in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry.
You bet.
Thank you, folks, for being with us. And good